get some of the details wrong, but I did sort of outline it. Your first rally was 1958?
59.
59, and in an MG TD.
Correct.
Which you found unreliable, so you moved to an MGA.
Yes. That's true.
But of course, he met Anne, they tried rallying together, worked perfectly. But Anne at the time was driving an Alpha.
It's true.
I can't remember what model. Do you remember, Ian? What model of Alpha it was we figured out? Maybe not.
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. It wasn't very reliable, so she moved on to a Volvo P1800. So it already warms my heart. Now,
do you need a head gasket for it? There's one.
I have a whole B20 engine we can stick in it. It's over here. Anyway, I know Tom won the Thunderbird Rally, which is the winter rally in the interior of BC in 1963. He's run it several times in between. He also won it last year at 2015. So that's not a bad record. Multiple national champions, chief steward for Canada, FIA steward at Olympus, was it?
Olympus, yeah.
Was head of the forerunner to cars when it was still affiliated with CASC. Just a huge accomplishment. Tom was a chemical engineer, worked all over the world, was very prominent in the field of what amounted to pollution control for pulp mills and that kind of thing, and with all kinds of chemical reactions. And he flew in just to come see us from Parksville. So, Tom, please go ahead. Thank you very much. I can relinquish the podium.
I'm just going to move it up a little bit.
Go ahead. Can I get you something to drink? You need a glass of water or anything?
No, it's right there. Okay, well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Can you all hear me back there? Yes. Okay, first of all, I want to apologize to people who either went to the 50th anniversary or who were in Calgary 2 weeks ago, because I'm going to repeat a little bit of the same stuff. But first, I really want to thank Martin for inviting me to this wonderful get-together. And also to thank him for according me the honor of speaking to you. I'm always a bit awestruck and humbled when asked to speak at these occasions. But I will press on regardless. I'm going to be talking a bit about the history of rallying in Canada and in parallel about my own 57 years in the sport. And I'm going to be telling this from my perspective from the far western part of our great country. And if my discourse sounds a bit regionally biased, that's because it is. And I can also assure you that in the best rally style, the stories that I relate will be somewhat embellished. Now, most of what I'm going to tell you will have occurred in the 60s and 70s, and there's two reasons for this. First, the 60s and 70s were the really formative years of our sport as we know it today. Second, most of you weren't around then, so you will have no idea whether I'm telling you the facts or not.
Some of us really.
I go back a long ways in this sport, and as I recall in the early days after the rally, we'd sit around and hurl camel dung, because bullshit hadn't been invented yet. Today we place a lot of emphasis on television coverage. When I started, we did not even have television. Well, that's not quite true. My family got its first TV set in 1956, just before the World Series, and yes, I did watch Don Larson pitch that perfect game. But motorsport coverage on television? Jalopy races from Hollywood. 1/2 hour, Saturday night, and I was glued to that TV. I was born and raised in Chilliwack, which is a small city about 100 kilometers east of Vancouver. And it could have been the setting for the cult movie American Graffiti. Hot rods and custom cars were the cool item. Cars were chopped, channeled, painted candy apple red. Accessories, well, spinner hubcaps for the real good, dual dipsticks and overhead floor mats.
Fuzzy dice.
There were a few sports cars around then, and a couple of friends of mine actually had MGTDs. But let's go back to the history in Canada. At the end of World War II, some servicemen returning from duty in Europe brought back British-built sports cars. And they were such a hit that soon enterprising car dealers started importing them. And owners of these sports cars, being a breed unto ourselves, soon started organizing themselves into clubs, which started organizing sporting events, one of which was car rallies. Now to start with, there was no common rules, and each club sort of made up its rules as it went along, and many of them were trick or gimmick rallies, what today we would call a super navigational rally. And as I recall in those days, some of the speeds were given not in miles per hour, Canada wasn't metric yet, but in such obscure units as furlongs per fortnight, or how about light years per leap year. We navigators were busy in those days. But it should also be noted that safety was of no concern. We rallied in open-top sports cars with no roll cages and not even any seat belts. So we've come a long ways. Also, the cars used were everyday drivers. You rallied on Sunday, hope there was enough left of the car to drive to work on Monday. To bring some common rules to rallying, the clubs started organizing themselves into groups of clubs. And this was generally along regional or provincial boundaries. And then some of these regional organizations got together to form a national organization called the Canadian Automobile Sports Clubs, or CASC, which is the forerunner of what today we call ASN Canada FIA. A major milestone was the start of the Canadian National Rally Championship in 1957, although it was not truly national in scope at that time. And this is where I entered the picture. I got my learner's license in 1957, the same year that the championship started. And I got my full license through a high school driving course, learned to drive on a 1958 Chevy sedan with 3 on the tree. How many may remember those cars?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay. The family car was an Oldsmobile 98, which had, for those days, a big honking V8 engine. And typical of yank tanks, lousy brakes, lousy suspension. I occasionally had use of that car, which was probably not a good idea. High-powered car, teenage boy, little driving experience, and way, way too much testosterone. One night coming back from I don't remember where, I got into a dice with one of my friends in the MG. My big V8 pulled away on the straightaway. But when we hit the twisty bits, that MG went by me on the inside and disappeared. Right then and there I decided, I got to get me one of them. Thanks to an indulgent father, in the fall of 1959, I left home to attend the University of BC in my very own MGTD, 1952 vintage, bright yellow. I quickly learned about Lucas Electrics. Within 24 hours of taking possession of the car, the Lucas Electric fuel pump quit. Now, for those of you who have not enjoyed the experience of owning an older British car, you need to know this. Joseph Lucas Company manufactured virtually all of the electric parts for virtually all of the British cars. They made switches, lights, fuel pumps, windshield wipers, coils, etc. But Lucas parts were notoriously unreliable. So bad, in fact, that they became the butt of many jokes. And perhaps the most famous is, why do the British drink warm beer? Because they have Lucas refrigerated. Right, absolutely. But did you know they also make vacuum cleaners? It was the only product that didn't suck. At UBC, I quickly joined the UBC Sports Car Club, which had some 150 members. And it was one of about 10 sports car clubs in the Vancouver area. Now, rallying was well established in BC when I joined the scene. And there were basically 2 types of rallies. Sunday rallies that were navigational in nature, ran about 8 hours in the Fraser Valley. And weekend rallies, which started Friday evening, ran for 24 hours, took a 12-hour overnight break on Saturday, and then ran another 10 to 12 hours on Sunday. And these latter ones were what we would call a drive-X. And these rallies started in Vancouver, but ran well into the interior of BC and sometimes down into Washington State, and would cover some 1,600 kilometers. One of my favorite stories comes out of this period. Seems two gentlemen in an Alfa Romeo, remember that, were driving along a road on the top of a dike that contained the Alouette River. It was a dark and very foggy night, and they could hardly see the road ahead. So the river was on their right, and they were looking for a road on the left. The driver asks, "What's next?" Navigator replies, "A left turn." Driver, "Where?" Just then the navigator spots and says, "Right here." Right here. For many years after that, we called the Alouette River the Alpha-Wet River. A major event happened in 1959 that would impact rallying in Canada. British Columbia held an international trade fair, and as part of that event, they ran a 4,000-mile car rally from Toronto to Vancouver. The rally was so popular that Shell Oil picked it up, and from 1960 to 1968, the Shell 4000 was Canada's premier motorsport event. And the Shell 4000 helped pull rallying in Canada into one cohesive unit. For the first time, competitors from across the country were rallying against each other. And not only that, but from right across the country, the varying car clubs, and rally clubs especially, were working with Shell to put that event together, consulting on what roads to use, and also supplying controls and other helpers. So it was the first time that basically all rallies in Canada worked on one objective, to make that rally work. Now, my first car rally was the 1959 Totem. And that rally actually still runs today. And I came about 56 out of 60 that finished. Had an electrical fire in the car. Lucas strikes again. Now, a sane person would have quit, but not me. I've never claimed to be sane when it comes to this sport. In 1962, largely due to the impact of the Shell 4000, British Columbia finally joined the CASC, finally making it and the National Rally Championship truly national in scope. By this time, as Martin said, I'd moved up to an MGA 56 vintage, bright green. In 63, with my good friend Bill Fain navigating, I won my first major rally, the Thunderbird. Now, I have some more stories from that rally, and if anybody's interested, we can talk after this session here. But the MGA also gave me another Lucas lesson. Joseph Lucas was known as the Prince of Darkness. He did not invent darkness, he invented sudden, unexpected darkness. Late one night I was driving down a fairly isolated road with the high beams on. Another car approaches, so I hit the dimmer switch. Every light in the car went up. High beams, low beams, parking lights, dash lights, everything. Very scary. Now, the good news is that I had auxiliary driving lights, and they were not Lucas flamethrowers. They were not. The bad news is that to meet the rules, they were wired through the high beam circuits, which isn't working. The good news is, I have one of those hidden bypass switches you don't tell the tech inspectors about. So by reaching up under the dash, flicking the switch, I was able to go right from the battery to the driving lights, and so I had lights to get home safely. Now, during my time at the University of British Columbia, I started getting involved in the politics of motorsport, holding various executive positions in that club, including president. And I also started to dabble in the CASC regional politics in British Columbia at that time. Well, after 7 years for what should be a 5-year degree, I finally graduated from chemical engineering in 1966, promptly brought a brand new white MGB and headed to Castlegar in the interior of British Columbia, where I would start my professional career. There was a car club in nearby Trail. I quickly joined that club, and within a few weeks, along with other club members, I was off to Spokane, Washington for the Ponderosa Sweepstakes Rally. Now, this was my first rally in the United States, and it was an eye-opener to me in 3 ways. First, the rally was timed to the second, whereas in Canada we were still running to the minute. And I quickly realized I not only needed a navigator, I needed a UNIVAC. How many people are old enough to know what that is? Second, the Ponderosa had an actual stage. There was a handful of rallies running in Washington State that had a stage, and they used it as a tiebreaker. Like I say, it was very rare in those days. But for the first time, I could put my foot down without the worry of oncoming traffic. 2 corners, and I was hooked on stages. Like big time hooked on stages. And by the way, I posted second fastest time. Now third, I realized that these Americans were good organizers, they were great people, and there were lots of them. And since that rally, I have put a lot of time and effort into encouraging cross-border participation, as well as spending a lot of time down there rallying and officiating. Now in '67, I realized that the MG was not a good car for the interior of BC because the winters were just too rough. So I traded up to a Pontiac Firebird 400. And all my sports car friends laughed at me. That is until I posted second fastest time of day on a rally stage on a go-kart track. But I've got a few war stories about that Pontiac as well. And if there was one car I ever had that I wanted, we'd like back, it's that Pontiac, believe it or not. Now in the late 1960s, another thing happened that would have a huge impact on our sport, and that was the start of the importation of cars made in Japan. Almost as soon as they started bringing cars into Canada, the Japanese manufacturers became involved in rallying. And this continues until this day. To be fair, manufacturers from many other countries have supported us over the years, but it is the Japanese that have been the most consistent and the most generous. And at about this time, the cars used in rallying changed from open-top sports cars to compact sedans with strong roofs. And also, people started building dedicated cars for rallies at the national level. In '68, the Firebird was traded off for a new Datsun 510, as Datsun was offering contingency money. Okay? How many people here own the 510? Quite a few, probably, yeah. I own about 7 of them altogether. Now, Jim Bowie, another rally partner, and I built up a Datsun 510 that had a Datsun 2000 sports car engine. Basically, we doubled the horsepower. This was before the SSS versions of the 510 came along. And we campaigned that successfully for several years. Jim finally dropped out for personal reasons. But now for me personally, I started spending time in the navigator's seat. Because the deal I had with Jim at that time when we built the car is that we would spend both times in both seats. We both wanted to drive, and we weren't too fussy about the navigating. So it turned out we were both good in both seats. And like I say, again, won the Thunderbird Rally again in '68, but as a navigator. And just as a side note, I won it again in '71 as a driver, and as Martin issued last year again as a navigator. Now at this time, the National Series in Canada consisted of 24 events, and it was just too many. And because such a high percentage of them were in Ontario and Quebec, it was virtually impossible for anyone from outside Ontario or Quebec to win. Now there's nothing sinister here, it's just sort of the way it evolved. And at that time, the championship standings were published 4 times a year. At the 1/4 point, the halfway mark, the 3/4 point, and at the end of the season. And for some reason, they were printed on green paper, and we referred to them as green sheets. They rarely showed anyone from the West or the Maritimes in the top 10. Now, being the political person that I am, in 1968, I got a conspiracy of Western organizers together to front-load the series with Western events by moving many of our dates to the first quarter of the season. By doing so, we hoped that at least the first green sheet would show somebody from the West in the top 10, and that this might sort of shake things up nationally to do something to make the series more equitable. Well, it worked. Sure enough, the first green sheet of 1969 included 3 Western events and 3 Eastern events. 6 of the top 10 drivers and navigators were from Alberta and BC. I still have that green sheet. Well, because the first place driver was Tom Burgess. An interesting aside, the second place navigator was Randy Black. We would change seats a little later on in our combined history. Well, however, as the bulk of the Eastern events took place over the rest of the season, we ended up well down in the standings. But the next CASC annual meeting that occurred happened just after that first green sheet came out. And it did have an impact. And after that, the National Rally Committee started looking at ways that they could make the series more equitable, make it even and fair for people wherever you were from the country. Now, they didn't quite make it, but at least they were trying, and there was a serious effort to make it. And more of the effort actually came out of the people in Ontario and Quebec than out of the people in the Maritimes in the West. So. Anyways, let us move on to the 70s. In 1971, an effort was made to revive the Trans-Canada Rally after Shell had dropped out in 68. And it was done as a BC Centennial project and paid for by the BC government. And it would run 5,000 miles from Ottawa to Victoria. However, the BC government, because it was putting up the money, insisted that citizens from BC get most of the paid jobs. As a result, I was asked to be clerk of the course, with responsibility for putting the route together, for running lead car, and doing the other odds and ends that the clerks do. However, I had just started a new job with a new employer, and after just 1 month on the job, I had to approach my new boss and say, I need 2 months off. Now, luckily I got it, but I did have this personal letter from the Premier's office that helped. Now, that rally went very well, but we could never find sponsors for it again, and so it has never run again. And of course, I have some very interesting war stories from that rally, if anybody's interested after my talk. Now, later in 1971, while on a rally in Edmonton, I met a wonderful lady called Anne. And after a long and sometimes distant romance, we married in 74, and we're still here. She's my biggest fan, and I'm very, very lucky to have had her for so many years. Now, the National Championship was still a problem. Most of the 24 events were of the Drive-X type, although there were still a few of the old navigational types around. There was a desire and a need for speed in these rallies because we wanted to put more emphasis on the driver, and especially the drivers wanted more emphasis on the driver, and the speeds started getting out of hand as organizers were looking for roads where 10% below the legal limit was not possible. And consequently, we had many close calls with oncoming cars, and this led to many irate locals. It was time for a change. I became a member of the National Rally Committee in 1972 and was part of the team that rewrote the rule book and changed the National Championship format to a stage type, which started in 73, and we also reduced the number of events to 12. If this sport had a golden age, it was the first 10 years that we ran the stage rally format. We had lots of sponsors, both for competitors and events themselves. Iconic historic names like Boyce, Perouse, Heinonen, and Black from Canada, joined by Buffum and Millen from the USA. Frequently, all 6 of those drivers were at one event, fully sponsored rides. It was very competitive in those days, believe me. And also in this time period, I became president of BC Region, and I learned many political lessons on how motorsport was governed in Canada at the highest levels. Late in 1975, Taisto Heinonen asked me to co-drive for him, as he wanted to take a shot at the Canadian Rally Championship. Now, I did not jump at this right away, as I realized there would be a huge commitment with respect to time and resources. However, I finally did agree, and as they say, the rest is history. We started in a Volvo 142, but after a few events, Taisto secured sponsorship from Renault and built up an R17 Gordini. And after a few teething problems, we won the last 3 events of the 76 series and finished second in the championship. At this time, Boyce & Woods were among the top competitors, and they had sponsorship from Toyota. For some reason, this was not working well for them, and when Walter was offered a ride with Triumph, he took it. However, Toyota asked Walter to recommend a driver for the Toyota sponsorship. He recommended Taisto. We saw our new ride for the first time in 1977 at the Person Edge, arriving the day before the rally. The car was in need of maintenance, lots of maintenance. We were coming out of a front-wheel drive Renault into a rear-wheel drive Toyota. Despite this, Taisto won the 3rd stage. That's how long it took him to get into that new car. However, minor mechanical problems plagued us throughout the rally, but we did manage to finish 3rd overall. We brought the car back to BC. Taisto completely rebuilt it. The next rally was the Pacific Forest Rally, which was in our own backyard, and we won that rally, and we went on to win the first of our 4 consecutive championships. I've often wondered but never had the courage to ask him if Walter Boyce had second thoughts about recommending Teister for that Toyota ride. 1981 saw a major change in my life. My engineering career was taking off, and I took a transfer to Tampa, Florida to start up an American-based sales and service office for our Canadian company. Now this created a long-distance relationship between Teister and myself that did not work, unfortunately, and we parted ways at the end of 1981. No problem. Once Randy Black heard I was free, he immediately conscripted me to co-drive for him on the Nissan team. And I won two more championships with him. But by the end of 1983, the golden age of rallying was over, and a general economic turndown resulted in the loss of all of our sponsored rides, including my own. We were losing events, and entries had dropped to an all-time low. One event only drawing 10 cars. We were on the verge of losing it all, and we were very close to losing it all. But we are rally people, and we are not to be denied. Many of the key players in the sport approached me to take over as the national rally director, despite the fact that I was no longer living in Canada. I reluctantly agreed, although I did lay down some certain conditions before I would accept the job. Now, fortunately at that time, we had enough really dedicated, hardworking people who worked very, very hard, and we did revive and save the National Series. When I resigned as the National Director in 1986, we had doubled the average entry compared to 1984. And now, I'm not taking credit for that. It was the work of the people like you and you and you, the guys in the trenches that made it work. Now also at this time, the CASC was in big trouble politically, and the politicking got very nasty. Because I was on the board as the National Rally Director, which is what we called them at that time, I did hold my own against some pretty nasty people, but I was glad to leave it as the National Director. And I was fortunate at that time, because after that the politics got really nasty, and it ended up in the demise of CASC, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. And also I got some war stories about some of the things that went on behind the scenes, if you want to hear that. From 1987 to 1989, the Olympus Rally in Seattle was on the World Rally Championship calendar. And in those days, there were 5 FAA stewards at each WRC event. The organizer was a very good friend of mine. I'd rallied against him many times, usually beating him, but that didn't, he never held that against me. Anyways, he was able to get me on the board of stewards for all 3 of those World Championship events. And this was an incredibly invaluable experience, as I got to see how the sport works at the very highest level. And I also got to meet and to know some of the very top FIA players. Now during this time I was rallying mostly in the United States, including a 2-year stint co-driving Nelson Shepard in the Volkswagen of America team. Well, CASC more or less self-destructed around 1990. I'm not exactly sure what happened, and I don't really care, but anyways, it re-emerged as ASN Canada FIA, and in 1991, CARS was formed to represent rally on ASN Canada FIA, and this new structure has worked well, and both CARS and rallying continue strong until now. My last good ride came in 1992, when Tim O'Neill asked me to co-drive him in a fully sponsored production GT Mitsubishi Galant VR4 in the SCCA Championship. Again, I hesitated before I accepted this because Timo was known as a bit of a wild man. He had a lot of natural talent, but he had very little discipline. Well, I did bring him a little bit of discipline along the way, and again, I got lots of stories there if you want to hear them. But we ended up winning the class for the year, finishing 2nd overall in the SCCA Pro Rally Championship, and we even won one rally outright. Like I say, it was an exciting ride, and I've got some nice Timo stories if you're interested. I gave up my rally license at the beginning of 1970 season for both medical and career reasons, and actually tried to walk away from the sport, but that was not to be. My presence was requested at the 1997 CARS annual meeting, where I most humbly and gratefully accepted the Ken Vaughan Memorial Trophy. It was one of the highlights of my life in this sport. I also made the mistake of talking to the CARS people and saying, you know, if there's anything I can ever do to help you guys, just let me know. And I'm still here, as you can see. In 1999, I was nominated for induction into the Canadian Motorsport Hall of Fame. I was living in Atlanta, Georgia at the time, and the Hall of Fame committee actually didn't know where I was. So they had not got a hold of me. And I found out about this just a few hours before the induction ceremony. So I was inducted in absentia. Now there's another war story about how I found out, and I can talk to you about that later if you're interested. In 2000, the next year, I did get to go to the ceremony and I was inducted properly, but I can guarantee you to this day, I am the only person that has been inducted into the Hall of Fame twice. A few years later, as the only Canadian with WRC stewarding experience, I was asked to steward Rally Charlevoix for the first time it was observed for WRC status. And this is where and the result of this is where, I made the mistake of saying if there's anything I can do. So when this rally came up, needed somebody with WRC experience, who got called. So, and of course I went. Well, both Charlevoix and Rally Mexico were using the same rally consultant. And Rally Mexico was also trying to get WRC status at the same time. Rally Mexico, like most rallies trying to get going, was a little short of money, and that consultant told them, rather than bring a steward over from Europe, where you're going to have to pay first-class tickets for him and his wife and God knows what else, there's this guy that lives in Atlanta that knows a lot about this, and he just did a good job on Charlevoix, so why don't you call him? So I got the call from Rally Mexico to go and be the steward for their rally the first time they did. We're looking for WRC status. So now I've stewarded in all three countries in North America. So. Now at this same time, Canada, the United States, and Mexico decided it would be a good idea if we had a proper FIA regional championship in North America. Say the North American Rally Cup, and it's called Cup, not championship, because of FIA regulations. It's not recognized by the FIA. And the reason they wanted to do this is that they really felt that both Charlevoix and Rally Mexico could get WRC status, and they wanted a feeder series for it, which is what the FIA Regional Series is. So they thought it was a good idea. Now, I'm known to all the key players in all three countries, and I ended up as the chairman of the group trying to make that happen. Sadly, it didn't work out, although we tried very hard. There was just too many problems trying to get rally cars in and out of Mexico due to their customs and immigration regulations down there. And within a few years, Mexico did get the WRC status, but Charlevoix lost its funding and interest in the FIA finished, so it didn't happen. Now, at about the same time, SACA dropped pro rallying in the United States. And two new sanctioning bodies evolved in the United States, Rally America and the United States Rally Championship. I stewarded several events in both series, and for many years served as the series steward for the United States Rally Championship. Career-wise, I retired in 2002 and moved back to Canada, and was immediately conscripted to steward both Rocky Mountain and PFR. And late in 2002, I got a call from Terry Epp to inform me that he was suffering from cancer, and he would no longer be able to go to Targa, Newfoundland to steward that event, and could I do it? So now I'm off to Targa, Newfoundland with 1 week's notice to the start of the rally. Again, a really wonderful experience. Again, I'd made the mistake of telling Terry, if you have anything I can do for you. In 2007 was the 50th anniversary of the Thunderbird Rally. And the organizers thought it would be a good idea if I entered for old time's sake. I had not entered a rally here since '97 when I gave up the license. Not any kind of a rally. Well, they offered me a free entry. And being the typical cheap rally guy that I am, I accepted. And as I said, I hadn't been in a rally for at least 10 to 11 years. So I ended up buying a set of studded hackers, called up my Navigator from 1963, and headed off to do a rally in my Toyota RAV4. Not the best car, but it did a lot better than most people suspected. But I did have a lot of fun, despite we finished well back, of course. But now I'm hooked again. And I've been back doing TSD rallies ever since. It gets worse. For the last couple of years, I've been entering 3 or 4 TSD events a year with my friend Jim Bowie, who had rallied with in the late 60s. And we decided, rather than use our own personal cars, that we'd buy a car. So what did we end up with? Somebody asked me this last night, so here's the correct answer. It's a 1996 JDM Subaru WRX Type RASTI version 2V Limited. We call it a 555 car. And that's another set of war stories. And like I say, when it said limited production, they only made 555 of them. Well, how are we doing? Well, in 2 weeks, Jim and I will be honored as the 2015 BC TST champions. Out of the 4 events, we won 2, took second and a third, and organized the 4th. To the young people, we say, old age and treachery will overcome the youth and skill every time. And how about the Canadian Rally Championship? At the end of this year, we will name our 60th national champions. We are the only motorsport in Canada that has a national championship. To have it running successfully for 60 years is an achievement that we can all be very, very proud of. Now, another subtle thing will happen towards the end of this year that will affect me, but the rest of you could probably care less about. Since 1963, I have been at the top of the Canadian Performance Rally Lifetime Standing. I do believe that later this year, Antoine Lestage will knock me off of that lofty perch. And I can't think of anybody better to do it. Now, this is the end of my formal presentation. If you have any questions or want to hear any of those war stories that I talked about, I'm at your disposal for the rest of the evening. Thank you.
You getting cold?
No, I'm doing fine.
Okay, so you got to tell us about the 63.
Thunderbird? Okay. I'm still in university and I'm a standard.
I have to warn you, my dad did his apprenticeship at Lucas after university.
Well, I may have to quit early because I got a Lucas pacemaker. 1963 Thunderbird. I'm your typical fairly broke university student with my MGA. The tires I had on the car were bald Michelin X summer tires. Now, how bald were they? Well, they were one of the original steel belted radios, and some little pieces of that steel belt were showing around the edges. As it turned out, that year the rally was an ice run, and by some coincidence, Michelin X tires stuck on that stuff. And maybe they got a bit of help from that little bits of iron sticking out too. But these were the days before political correctness when setting average speed. At the end of the first day, at the end of 24 hours, we were 90 minutes late. And we were still 30 minutes ahead of car number 2. We start the second day, and we miss a turn right off the bat. By the time we get back on course, we're the last car on the road. Before we reached the first control, we passed all 12 cars in front of us. There were only 12 cars in the run at that point. Then we caught the lead car. He stopped us, put the whole rally back half an hour so he could get ahead again. The rally was to finish in Hope. I don't know how many people are familiar with the geography out in Canada, but the last major point was in Princeton, and then we would drive the whole Princeton Highway to finish, okay? Well, we'd missed an instruction somewhere before we got to Princeton. We had to go back, pick it up. Fortunately, there was no control in Princeton, but my navigator says, you know, Tom, this is 60 miles of highway, and we've only got 60 minutes. And in those days, I mean, this is the middle of winter. I mean, there was snow and ice, and it was a very twisting road through the mountains. Well, we made it. Spun a few times along the way, but we did make it. So that was my first big win. So, and that sort of put me on the scene as, oh, you've got to watch out for this guy Burgess because he knows what he's doing out there.
Crazy.
Crazy, yes. Yeah, crazy is right. I can tell stories here all night if you're willing to listen.
Oh, we're when you were navigating, did you have one of these?
Yes, I still got it. I still have it. In fact, between my stints in the United States, there was about 3 years when I was back in Vancouver. And Paul Westbrook, as most of you should know him,
Yes.
got a hold of me and he said, I got a friend from Calgary that wants to run this rally. Would you navigate for him? Yeah, why not? Well, his young friend shows up in a classic Thunderbird, or a classic Mustang with summer tires. But the Curtis story is that that's what I brought to navigate with. And nobody had been using Curtis for quite a while. So as soon as I got my instructions, I sat down and I'm cranking out, putting in the factor, out before I noticed that there was people around me. Who is this guy and what's that instrument he's using? Yeah, I've still got it. Most people threw the Curtis away but kept the container that it came in because it was just perfect for holding a stash.
In case you haven't seen one of these before, it's a mechanical calculator. Built, designed by a guy in a Nazi prison camp, a Polish guy.
Probably, yeah, they're German made, yeah.
Yeah, anyway, you sort of enter your numbers with these slide switches around the side, crank the handle a few times, and out comes your answer.
Yeah.
Minus decimals, of course. But
Yeah, well, you remembered, or some of us put little marks on there, so we always had a decimal. But they worked, and they worked very well.
Frank says, the Firebird.
The Firebird, yes. Well, I decided that it was time to change cars. I had, a series of MGs, but the MG wasn't working in the interior. You see, the winters were just too severe for a daily driver. And I had been sort of watching the pony cars. I knew a couple of guys that had Mustangs, and they were close, but I wasn't a Ford guy. I was brought up in a General Motors family, and then the Camaro came out, and I didn't like the look of that. And then the Pontiac Firebird came out, and I said, I guess that's the one. So I went down to the Pontiac dealer in Trail and ordered it right from the factory. You could do that in those days. If you wanted something special, you had to. So I ordered it with disc brakes. It was one of the first General Motors cars to have disc brakes. It was a 67 Firebird. Dealer tried to talk me out of it because nobody in their shop had ever seen a disc brake, and he was worried he couldn't maintain it. The only stuff I put on it, I took it with a standard 3-speed truck transmission, which was good enough. You only needed one gear with an engine that big anyways. But the hood-mounted tachometer,
Yep.
the first heads-up device, I put that on there and then put good seats in it, and that was it. Away I went. Well, all my buddies laugh at me, of course. Oh, you're a sports car guy and you're driving this big junker. Well, there were, as I mentioned before, a couple of rallies in the United States, and we used to run down there because it was easy to get to the ones down in Spokane and Richland, Washington, where we were in Trail there. And this one, they had this stage on a go-kart track. And I can remember my old buddy John Nagel, you probably don't remember, he's the guy that organized the Olympics. He's sitting there and he's laughing, he says, Burgess, I've got to see this, ha 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 ha. Well, I had more power than anybody else by a lot, so down the straightaway, there's a hairpin for the go-kart track. What do? You turn the wheel, lift off the gas, there's enough compression in the engine that the wheels lock up. Basically a handbrake turn without turning the handbrake. Back on the power. Came through. Second fastest time of day. And another time with that car, there was I guess it was out of Wenatchee, but there was this 20-mile up a hill that they had an impossible average speed on. And again, I was the second fastest up that hill, and the sports car, they were shaking their head. So I had a lot of fun with that car. I only had it for a year and a half, but put 60,000 miles on it. So, and I remember another time, I shouldn't be telling stories like this, but I was driving from Castlegar down to Vancouver. And it was winter, and there was a lot of gravel on the road up there. And it was coming down into a place called the Souse, where the highway was like this, coming right down. And as I was coming up to these downhill hairpins, I go by, you won't appreciate this, a Volvo. Well, I guess he decided that the yank tank was going to slow him down on the hairpins too much. So he went by me. Okay, that's fine. I tucked in behind him. First two corners I figured out what he was doing, and the third corner I went by him on the inside. He looked over this shoulder and I'm over here. I also got my first speeding ticket in that car. So let's move on. One of the other things I talked about was the 71 Centennial Rally. And again, I've got lots of stories there. And the first one I remember is that we'd been out for a couple of days. And I need to tell you that there was, the car we were using was called Presto. It was a Fiat 128 that Bruce and Betty Schmidt had built up, and I think they had won the Canadian Winter Rally in that year. If not, they had come close. But they are ex-Canadian champions. So the car had been a little bit of work done on it.
Just as a quick interruption, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
We actually did a Shell 4000 retrospective evening a few years ago. Bruce and Betty came along, Sylvia Goddard,
Yep.
a bunch of people you might know. It was quite interesting. It was Jeff's idea to do it, and he put it mostly together, wherever he was. It was a good evening, wasn't it, Jeff?
Yeah.
We all enjoyed it.
I've still got my little Shell 4000 yellow hat from the year I ran a control in the Shell. So. Anyways, we're about, I guess, about 3 days out. Anyways, we come into Sault Ste. Marie, and our contact there, maybe I ought to go back a bit. The overall organizer of this thing was a guy by the name of Jim Gunn, and he's a very historical character in motorsport in Canada. But what he had done was, over the years with the Shell, is he got to know people right across the country. And what he would do, he would go to the car clubs across the country and say, okay, you organize, give me some route from point A to point B. And then you go to the next club, give me point B to C. He did this right across the country. And that was very efficient, it really worked. So basically all we had to do when we were doing it, we just went from point to point, and we picked a route sometimes where there was options of what we wanted to do, and we figured out what speeds we wanted, and then we put it in a consistent format with consistent mileages. Anyways, we pull into Sioux, and our local contact is the chief of police. So we roar downtown, and by this time we're, haven't had a bath in a couple of days, and we're starting to grow beards. That's when I first grew the beard, was on the Centennial Rally in 71. And we're looking pretty grubby, and so we just sort of walk into the cop shop. And of course, the cops behind the desk there are like, who are these guys? And we said, oh, we're here to see the chief. And he had an office sort of off to the side, and he sort of heard us come in, and he knew who we were, and he come running, hey guys, come on in, blah, blah, blah. Hey, bring him a coffee. So that was the whole local, the other police officer had no idea who we were or what we were doing or why we were, a buddy of this police officer. We'd never met him before, but he knew who we were, so that was fun. The next bit I remember is we pull into Winnipeg, and they put us up into, I think it's the Royal Selkirk or something like that. It's the big CN, or it's the CP hotel in Winnipeg. And half a dozen guys from the Winnipeg club come in, and we're going over everything. And so we say, oh, what the heck, we gotta have a beer? So my partner phones down, send a half a dozen beer up to room whatever. Got the reply, sir, we can't serve beer without food. Okay, put on a bag of chips. We had 3 or 4 bags of chips that night. Now, another thing that happens, I need to set this story up, is that the Green Run was done by John Medwell. I don't know if you know him, but he was a very well-known and very successful competitor in Ontario in those days. But when they were doing the Green Run, the rear suspension on the car broke. And he wasn't sure what it was, and he was driving at the time, and he hit the brakes, which was the wrong thing to do, and the car ended up rolling and damaging one side. They managed to get it going and welded it back together, and away they went. So anyways, we're in the rally, and we're doing course opening, and we've gotten through all of the mountain stages in BC. We were getting to the end. We had one more stage to do, and that was a Westwood racetrack near Vancouver. And as opening car, we're trying to maintain it, an hour or two, and I wanted to get to Westwood a lot early to make sure it was set up all right. Anyways, we're getting close to Chilliwack, and there's a bit of twisty roads there. And the suspension lets go again. And this is 2 o'clock in the morning. Now, I knew what it was because of the experience that Medwell had, and so I didn't hit the brakes. I just used the engine compression to slow it down. Every once in a while, I'd fishtail it, hit the gas. Another Volvo story. The car behind us was a Volvo, and he saw what had gone wrong, and he pulled in behind me and blocked traffic so that no other cars coming up were going to get in my way. And he did have a couple of cars behind him, and he kept doing this to keep. We finally got the car off to the side. The Volvo went by, he kind of honked, we waved at him, and thank you. Now, communications in those days are not nearly what they are today. there was only one course opening car, and that was us, and we're stopped on the side of a highway, and we have no way of letting anybody know what's happening. And we're just barely out of the car, and we're standing there. What do? We hear a voice from across the other side of the way. You guys need help? It's a tow truck. Yeah, come on over. Where do you want to go? I'm 4 miles from where my father lives. Go to Dad's place, rang on the door at old dark 100, get him out of bed, borrowed his pickup truck, took some of the magnetic rally signs off of the old Fiat, put them on the pickup truck, beat the first rally car to Westwood by half an hour. Can you imagine the probability of that particular scenario happening if it had to break at such a point? It's these things that happen to me. I'm going, little earlier, the name Gossard came up. Hayden Gossard is the name I remember. He drove an R8 Gordini, and he ran it in the Centennial Rally. And he was winning when we got to Westwood. But he pushed the car too hard on the track, on the racetrack. And he bent a bunch of push rods, and the car would barely run. So he limped it down to the ferry terminal. The ferry trip is 2 hours, okay? And on that 2-hour ferry trip, they pulled the push rods out. The deck is steel on a ferry boat. They hammered those push rods straight, put them back in the car, and drove that car to the finish to win the rally. One of the legends.
More than that, they did it in the timing chain too. So they had. Anybody remember that about the timing chain?
I don't remember that part, but I remember hearing because the other competitors were talking about these guys banging down there because like number 2 and 3 car were down there watching them. They were kind of pulling for him in a way because we're all in this together type of thing, but they were sort of hoping it didn't work. So,
somebody else in the Vancouver area had an R8.
Yep.
They drove it over to the ferry terminal and they took the timing chain out of his car.
Really? Yeah, I hadn't heard that story before. Yeah.
Bent some push rod straight. Yes.
Yeah.
Every R8 Gordini here had to go and be Gossardized. Terry F had one.
Yeah.
They were the Subaru of the day.
Yeah.
Although they rusted into nothing in a few years.
Yeah.
Very light. Interesting. CASC. That was all. The dissolution was sort of predicated on the F1 race, was it not?
Yeah, that's what destroyed it. The problem is CSC sort of evolved. And this is interesting because initially it was made up of, the national executive was 4 elected officials, or 5, I'm not sure, president, vice president, the usual chain. And then also on the board were I'm not sure what they call them, the competitors. There was the race guys and the rally guys and the solo guys and the off-road guys. They all had a director on the formal board. And at that time, I come along as president of BC Region, and I don't like this setup, and I say, we have got to get the presidents of the region on the national board. And I fought very hard for that. I didn't make it while I was still president of BC Region, but a couple of years later it did happen. Now, a few years later, and I think it was 83, I guess, the last year that we when things were really good for us in rallying, is that we had I don't know what you would call it, but Nissan had brought in a car that they ran in production class. They weren't selling the car yet, but they had fully intended to have it going in Canada by the end of the year to meet the regs. They had to have so many of these cars in the country to run as production class. They ran into some kind of a problem that needed to be fixed before the cars could be sold, and they did not make it in time. And basically the cars were in Canada or in Canadian waters on a ship somewhere, but they weren't going to unload them until they had the fix known so they could fix them before they sent them out to the dealer. So legally they had not imported enough cars at the end of the year to fit the class, and they had won the class in points. Another name, Castledine, Chris Castledine, Donna's husband at that time, was driving the car. And of course the second and third place cars protested this, and it went to a hearing and la da 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 da. And the end result was that Nissan was thrown out of the championship, which was fair. Nobody objected to that. But they were also fined $10,000. And that has been controversial as to whether they should have been or not, because they had been putting a lot of rallying money into the sport, including that same year, there was a film they made called The Rally Master. They brought Rauno Aaltonen over. I don't know if you remember that, but in those days there used to be rallies in both, say, in New Brunswick and in Halifax. And they were a week apart, and so we used to, between the rallies, we used to go, and it depended on how bad your car was, whether you spent more time fixing the car or drinking. It was a week apart. But anyways, that was the time they brought Ron over to do a week, and he was with us with the Nissan team, so we got to spend a week with Ron Welton to do the Rally Master. But anyways, that's aside. But anyways, but at this time, there was problems with the FIA, and unfortunately, I hope there's no lawyers in the crowd because I don't mean to insult you, but
There is one.
but
He's late, so don't worry about it.
But there was troubles with the Formula One, and being a lawyer, as soon as there was any kind of a thing, he filed a lawsuit. He didn't try to work it out. He filed a lawsuit because that's the way he handled things. And so our $10,000 went to pay for those laws. Yeah. So that was part of the problems that we had, and at that time, I threatened to pull Raleigh out. I said, "You got to give us that money, or we're going our own way. I don't care. We'll figure out something, but we're going our own way." And it came down to a big showdown. And I'm glad to say I was one of the guys that threw him off the executive. We had a vote of confidence, and he didn't make it. So that's the kind of one, and it got worse after that. So again, it was all evolved around the Formula One thing. It had nothing to do with Raleigh. We were just innocent victims. So. But again, in the end, it worked out right, and good people on the race side as well as very good people, guys like, well, Terry Up especially, and the Nixons out of Calgary and a few others that I don't recall, worked very hard to get the cars going and the new formulas work. The old CASC thing didn't work; it wasn't going to. And one of the sort of the ironic things here is that when I was the national rally director and on the board, the presidents got together and decided that we should throw the competitive guys off, so the executive would now be just the elected executive and the 5 presidents. Okay, they didn't realize that they were up against me, and at the right moment, I put the motion on the floor to squash that, and I succeeded. And they looked at me and said, "How did you do that?" But what I'd done is I waited until 2 of them were out at the washroom or somewhere else, so that now the guys on my side held the majority, and I got that motion through very quickly before they got back and knew what happened.
The CASC finally came apart on sponsorship for the F1 between Molson and Labatt.
They both had
I'm not
contracts.
surprised. I'm not surprised, yeah.
We still have CASC in Ontario.
Well, yeah, and we have sort of remnants of it in BC.
Yeah, it's just a label.
Yeah, but but like I say, it doesn't. Fortunately, we've always had good people at the right time in the sport, and we have succeeded. So that's good. So. Let me tell you. Go ahead. Question.
Apart from you, who's the best driver you've been with?
That's hard to say. I would probably come down on the side of Tystone, because I mean he blew me away so many times, and of course I was with him for a longer time. I did a one-off rally with Clive Smith, and unfortunately we had a bad accident when he went off the road, and of course I was in the car at the same time. It was the worst accident I remember. We went head for head 3 or 4 times, and we were so far off in the bush that the next car never saw us. They didn't realize we were gone until we didn't check in, and then somebody said, "Hey, there's a car missing." But Tim O'Neill, probably the greatest natural talent I've ever seen, but undisciplined. And probably the most disciplined was Randy Black. Randy is probably the only Canadian champion that has never rolled a car on a rally. He could always bring the car home. And Randy himself would tell you, he says, "I'm not the best." And I mean, he did beat Tystone and I one year because we had a lot of mechanical problems. And he was quite upfront. He said, "Tystone's a much better driver than I am." He He says, so I'm just going to shoot for second place and hope you guys screw up. And he was right. And he was right. And I saw him one time, we were on this long straightaway. And we're topped out in 5th gear. And he's been told by the mechanic, 6,000 RPM or something like that. That's it. Don't go over that. And he was at half throttle, right on 6,000, but he would not go over that. That's how disciplined he was. And it cost us several seconds on that stage because of that long straightaway. But like I say, he never rolled a car. Very, very disciplined. It depends. I've been with lots of good guys over the years. Been very fortunate. So.
Some of us here know Taisto. I mean, obviously Dennis does. I know that Steve's had supper with Taisto before. Taisto, who obviously was champion back in the 70s. He actually ran at Rocky 2 years ago in an underpowered 2-wheel drive Toyota.
And
He wasn't doing really well until the second day when it was really icy up in the hills. I mean, really icy, and I talked to Taisto, I was senior student there, and he says, well, the car hasn't got much power, but today it's icy, we do good. And he won 2-wheel drive, and he was 72 at the time.
Yep.
And
it gets worse.
yes.
I mean, we have ice crosses in British Columbia. In fact, there's supposed to be one this weekend that if I hadn't been here, I would have gone there, but I would have been disappointed because it got so warm in BC that the ice melted. But I've been running these ice crosses for several years there in an old Toyota MR2 jumper that he drives around. And he would consistently win. Beat the younger kids. Didn't matter what they were driving, he would beat them all the time. And right now, he is building a rally car, and he's 75 years old, building it from the bottom up. I think it's about an 86 Corolla that he is putting a Supra 6-cylinder engine in. And he's pulling suspension from one car and brakes from another one. And he's building this thing up. And he's going to be running 2-wheel drive class, open 2-wheel drive. And I don't know if he's going to run the whole series or just the ones in Western Canada, but you better watch out for him because he's still that good. That's another reason why I say I'd probably go with Tyson, because he's still doing it.
There have been some excellent 2-wheel drive drivers, though. Bo Skoranek was good.
Yes, yeah, Bo was good. There have been lots of really good drivers in the 2-wheel drive class and in the production classes, no doubt about that. They do not get the coverage they deserve. And I know at Calgary we were talking about that, and I think we're going to see it change that, and I hope that's the case, is that they get more coverage, because they are. And they put on a really good show. They're very competitive down there.
Anybody else got any questions?
Just one
Sure.
quick thing here. Bo is actually mentioned in the Annotated Highway Traffic Act as a case law.
Oh, okay.
Is he?
He lost.
Bo Skoranek, for those that don't know, he was driving Terry up with the Navigator. And what did they run? I can't remember.
Some Swedish car, Saab or something.
No, just 240. I think the Z was a Datsun.
I have another Taisto story. I have quite a few actually. But I had done a rally with him when he was running his R8 Gordini, and it was the old championship. I think it was around 72, 73. Anyways, we went to Winnipeg. It was a one-off with him because I was running with other drivers normally at that time. And so we got to know each other right then. I think we finished third in Winnipeg. But anyways, now it's stage rallies, okay? And it's the winter rally in BC, and this is the first one up. I'm running with Taisto, and it's in the Volvo 142. We're third on the road. Car number one is a guy by the name of Lori Paparinta, another Finn who was very fast, although crazy fast, not smart fast. I don't know if anybody remember him or not. He was known for have roll cage will travel. He worked a deal with Renault when they were bringing in, I think they called it the R5, I'm not sure what they called it over here. Or late car, something like that. Well, what he would do, the deal he had worked out with them was that wherever the rally was, they would go to the nearest Renault dealer, get one of their demonstrator cars, I guess, or even a showroom car, and put the roll cage and the belts and the lights on it, and he would go out and beat the shit out of it in the rally and probably do pretty good, and then he would take it back to the dealership, take the roll cage out, and then go to the next rally and do that. So yeah, new car for every rally. No, let's have roll cage, we'll travel. So Laurie was, but he was fast. car number 2 on the road was a guy named John Rogers. And John had just won the SCCA Pro Rally Championship. A very good driver out of Seattle. We're car 3 on the road. Anyways, away we go. 3rd car out. Okay, now I've driven a lot of winter rallies myself and done fairly well. And we come to the first corner, gee, no problem. Boy, that was quick. Now we're coming to the 2nd corner, and he's getting towards the top end of 3rd gear, and I'm thinking, nah, I've lifted. He's still flat down. Choom. The next corner comes up, I've lifted and hit the brakes on my side. He's still going, and I'm thinking, I wonder where the shovel is. Zing. 5 miles in, we catch John Rogers. Tyster says, he's got a problem. I said, I don't think so, Tyster. We went by him. 15 miles in, we catch Pavarinta. Pavarinta thinks it's Roger, and he says, there's no way he's passing me. 2 corners later, Pavarinta parks it on the top of a very large snowbank. We get to the end, and we waited at least 15 minutes till the next car showed up. Okay. So here we are, and then we get back in, and I guess it was the 3rd last stage, just before service, but clunk, clunk, clunk out of the back, and there's something wrong with the rear half shaft. Oh, now we're in trouble. I mean, we got a half an hour lead on everybody. What are you going to do? Fortunately, there was somebody around that had virtually identical Volvo, and he loaned us the half shaft, so we had enough time in service to do it, and we just took it easy on the next 2 stages, and I think somebody else won those 2, but it didn't matter. We were so far ahead, so we end up winning the rally. And we get back into the, at the finish in the service area, and we go to the guy that had lent us the axle, and we said, do you want it back? He said, no, we don't need it. You don't need it? Oh, no, he's got a new one. Now, this is an overnight rally. I mean, this all happens at 3, 5 in the morning. Where did you get it? Midnight Auto Supply. Another one that I remember is we're flying down this road, and we come over a corner, and there's no road there. And we go straight off into a farmer's field. Turn around, come back out. And we were talking about it afterwards. And I said, well, what happened if there had been something bad there, like a gate or something? He said, I would put the car backwards and we'd have hit it with the rear bumper. Oh, yeah, right. Yeah, right. Well, 3 rallies later, same thing happens, only there's a big gate there, okay? The car went right around, 180 degrees, off backwards, stuck it back into gear, and just drove straight up. And he was really good at building cars. He was really good at bodywork. He used to build his own headers and stuff like that, his own roll cages. And now this is the kind of sponsorship we had in those days. Every year, they would give Tysto 2 new cars, either Celicas or Corollas. One would be built into a rally car, and the other one was sort of built as a show car. It was also a spare parts car, or if we really racked it, prime car, we could quickly rebuild the backup car into another rally car. The other thing that would happen is, a tire truck would show up from Bridgestone or wherever was the sponsor in those days. Then I'd load about 400 tires, for the season. That's the kind of sponsorship. And we weren't the only people that had that thing. But anyways, Tyster would take the car, and basically he would take it all apart and put it back together again. And he would want to take the weight out of it, the liners and stuff, things you don't really need would come out. And one of the things he always wanted to get rid of is there's, on passenger side doors or driver side doors, any door, there's a big reinforcing bar in there. So if you get hit, it doesn't come in. Yeah. That thing weighs about 50 or 60 pounds. I mean, it's a big chunk of iron. So he wanted to take these out of there. Well, how are you going to do that? Oh, you watch. So he pulls the inner lining out so you can see the thing in there, and gets out his welding torch, cutting torch, and he's going to cut. And he said, you're going to, there's paint on the outside of this door, and you're going to destroy it. You're going to have to repaint the car. Oh, no. Did you just put this wet blanket on there? And he got towels and that, lots of water. He said, you just hold it, sort of move it around on the door. So we did that, and he gets in there with a cutting torch and cuts it in 3 places. And then these things are held in on the doors just by about 3 spot welds on either side. You go in there very carefully, get the welds out of there, and those pieces would fall out, and out they came. And there was not a mark on the door. You would have never known he'd done that. Just fill up the little holes that he drilled out. And, you know, a little touch-up paint. You never. Another time he decided he wanted to give us a little wider track. No problem, there was axles available you could do that with. But it meant the wheels would be outside the little flares that they had there. So he said, wait, we make bigger flares. Well, how are you going to do that? Oh, he says, I'm just going to cut a hole through here, and then I'm going to weld in a piece of metal. Oh, sure you are. Sure you are. You're going to warp the whole fender. No, she did it. It looked professional. You'd never known it wasn't stock. It looked that good when he got done. He never bent it. Rarely burnt the paint with that torch. I don't know how he did it. He was just a genius. Just a genius.
Generally a nice guy.
Yeah, he is. Yeah. Well, he could be a little hard to co-drive for.
Really?
Yeah, he went through, after I left him, he went through a series. He could never hold on to people. So. And he could he could never take anything but first place. He was very driven. So, although he never, I don't think he ever gave me a harsh word, but I knew how to deal with him, and I think he understood that he wasn't going to get somebody that could. He had been through this before in Europe, going through drivers. So.
Didn't Tim O'Neill, didn't you have to say to him finally, look, drive down the middle of the road, damn it.
Yeah, I was just going to tell you, yeah. Tim O'Neill, okay. And like I say, he was known as a madman, and I'd say I hesitated when he asked me to co-drive for him, because I knew it was going to be exciting at the least. But anyways, he had this fully sponsored Mitsubishi sponsorship with what was then a Gallon VR4. And he didn't get the car in time. He did not get it ready for the first rally. So now we missed the first one. And so now we get our second event. Okay? And there's something wrong with the turbo, we think, because we're not getting any boost. And he had one of these adjustable gauges inside there. You can turn it, no boost, no boost, no boost. Well, we're going to have to go with the way we got it. Well, we start and it's uphill. You know, and he hits the gas and going, and all of a sudden I'm going, this is a production GT car. It's any open car I've ever seen. 2 miles in, blow the turbo apart. Nothing wrong with the turbo. What's wrong with the gauge? So we kept cranking it up, cranking it up. We must have had, 25 atmosphere of boom, blew everything. So we DNF. Well, anyways, he gets that fixed for the next rally, and we start the next one. And again, we're going fast, and I said, I think you should slow down a little bit here. You know, you're going, oh no, I know, toom. Well, about halfway through the stage, off the road, hit a tree. There's no way we're going any further. So now we're coming up to the start of the fourth rally. We have not even finished one stage. Okay? And there's only something like 8 rallies in the series. So I said, here's the moment of truth. Tim, this is what we're going to do. We have to finish this stage. If nothing else, we've got to, because we haven't finished the stage yet. I want you to drive right down the middle of the road, short shift, and I don't want to feel this car sideways. And he goes, and I said, look, this is not about having fun. It's about phoning the sponsor after the rally, and are you going to tell him we won the class, or are you going to tell him we had another DNF? Oh, okay. So we did that. Very good natural driver. He got to the end and he said, that was awful. They're going to laugh at us. We were so slow. I said, I don't think so. Bruno Krivich, another well-known driver, was the car ahead of us. I went up to talk to them guys. Then I went to talk to the car behind us, which was our main competition in production GT. Then I sat down to Tim and I said, look, you're only 3 seconds slower than Bruno, and you beat our competition by 15 seconds. We're going to run the rest of the rally just the way we ran this stage. And we won the class and we came third overall. And he's going, oh. And basically we ran the rest of the season that way. Now, at one point, and it was a rally out of Seattle, and I know those roads inside out. And at the end of the first day, by coincidence, all of the top runners had fallen out or had problems. And we're sitting first overall by a couple of seconds. And I think, again, it was the guy from Maine, I don't remember his name. He put a lot of money into the sport. tell him, he was a really good guy.
Oh, Carl Merrill.
Carl Merrill, yeah. Carl Merrill was second, and he was only a couple of seconds behind us. And he'd had a major mechanical problem, something that put him behind us to start. So, good old Tom goes to work here. And I said, okay, we're going to take it easy on this first stage. So we then talked to Carl, because he's now running behind us with the reseating. And he's beating us. And I said, oh, I backed him off too much. I'm going to tell him to speed up. Carl looks at me and goes, well, the next road I knew was one of those ones where Tim wasn't going to get into trouble. So I said, Tim, run this one as fast as you like and we'll be okay. And he did. We beat Carl by about 7 seconds. Merrill's not going to take this. He speeds up. 2 stages later, he's off forever. And we ended up winning that round. But it was, like I say, as soon as I got him controlled, it worked very well. And I always remember that the final event of the year, and because we had lost so many points at the beginning of the season, we're still playing a bit of catch-up here. And we had to win our class nationally to win the championship. But with the right combination of things, we could also get second overall in the championship. But we had to finish third overall or higher, and the guys against us had to finish behind us. Well, those guys we had to worry about, DNF. Now we're sitting car 4 on the road, and we have to beat one of those guys. Well, we're far enough behind them, we're not going to catch them, and we're far enough ahead of the guys behind us that they're not going to catch us. So our production GT championship is guaranteed. All we have to do is finish. And so Tim said, I really would like to finish second in the championship. So I said, no problem, Tim. I guarantee you, in the last 3 stages of the round, which we were coming up to, one of those 3 guys is going to go off. How do you know that? You just wait. Sure enough, penultimate stage, one of them's parked. He looks at me, I don't believe you knew that. I was simply playing the odds. I could have been wrong, but I know the guys that, who these guys were, and what would happen. So, like I say, it was an interesting ride. I want to tell you about the Hall of Fame story.
1 second before you
I'm
do.
about to leave. Tom may or may not remember me. He's the person that's responsible, Alan Brown.
Oh, yes.
Responsible for our family and all our generations being in rally, because Tom took me for my first ride when he was about 20 some odd and I was much younger. And I can remember in a Volvo, strangely enough, going up and down to Emerald Mine with you and a couple of other things. Anyway, so the tradition continues, and just wanted to thank you for heading home. But anyway, so somebody that's obviously been involved in the sport and given it to a lot of us. Take care.
Thank you.
Yes,
It's been my pleasure. The Hall of Fame thing. Like I say, the organizing committee did not know where I was. I was living in Atlanta. They still had me living up in Trail, around there, because I'd been the president of that club up there. That was in the late 60s. So I knew nothing about this. And part of the setup to this story is Anne has always been involved in the travel business, and when we were living in Atlanta, she had convinced one of the small local radio stations to run a half-hour travel program that she sponsored. It was a call-in show. So she would give a little spiel, and then people would call in and ask questions about wherever in the world they wanted to go. And she actually did this from home. So when this was on, I would get in my car, and I would sort of drive around Atlanta and listen on the radio to her program. Well, shortly after I left, I always left about 20 minutes before she was ready to go so she could get organized. Randy Black calls. He's read about Tom Burgess being inaugurated in the Hall of Fame, and he doesn't know about it, and he's upset. And he thought I was a good friend. Why are you doing this to me? And Ann says, we don't know anything about this. So this was the first we knew in Atlanta that I was to be inducted into the Hall of Fame. So I'm driving around Atlanta. Ann introduces herself. By the way, my husband, Tom Burgess, has just been nominated into the Canadian Motorsport Hall of Fame. And I said, what the hell is going on? I heard it on the radio.
American radio.
Yeah, downtown Atlanta. Downtown Atlanta.